Hello, welcome to another session of Decisions Training. Today's session is all about unit tests and debugging in version 8. With the help of this session, we would be able to gain knowledge and expertise on decisions concepts like debugger, global debugger, unit test, sample data, profiler, and logs. Throughout this session, I'll be navigating back and forth between the slides and Decision Studio so that you can easily correlate between the concepts and application. Let's go ahead and jump into our first topic, debugger and global debugger. When we speak about debugger, the first thing that comes to our mind is, what is a debugger? Why do we use it? When we create a workflow, rule, or any other set of process in decisions, it is important to make sure that the logic works properly before it is being used in a production environment. To achieve this, decisions comes with the inbuilt testing functionality called debugger that allows users to test their processes and ensure that these processes run without any errors. In short, debugger is a graphical user interface that allows users to debug or test flows rules without having to leave the designer studio. Debugger is a visual development environment, uses familiar flow elements, and all the data inside the flow, like form data or any other type of data that we are passing in, is easily accessible. Now, let's quickly jump on to our designer studio. We are currently in our version 8. Right here, we have a purchase request flow that I have already built in for us. And as we navigate into this flow, we have our debug functionality right on the top, similar to its placement in previous versions. We also have the ability to run this flow or profile this flow in addition to the debug. Let's go ahead and debug this flow. We also have the ability to change the option by clicking on the options drop down over here and selecting the type of functionality that we would like to test. Let's keep this as a simple debug only option and start our debugging. As soon as we click on start debugging, we would be able to see or visualize exactly the same set of process that we have configured in our workflow. Right here, we have a form which asks for the name of the applicant and also the requested item. As soon as we click on the submit, the flow gets executed and we would be able to see the next set of process in the workflow. The next set of process is evaluating the rule, which is approval rule. As you see, the orange line over here indicates the path that the flow has taken. And on clicking on the left-hand section, we would be able to see the inputs and outputs of that particular step. Right here, the approval rule is evaluating the type of the day. Since it is a Tuesday, the rule got evaluated as true and returned to us with a true path. As you see, the flow has taken the true path, and the number on top of each step indicates how many times that this particular step has been executed. By clicking on each of the steps, we would also be able to see the input and output data. As you see, after the true path, there was a send email step. And by clicking on the step, we would be able to see the inputs as well as the outputs of this particular step. We can also test this as many times as we want by clicking on the create new session over here. And this allows us to debug the process again and again. Creating multiple sessions like these allows us to pass in different input data and evaluate this as many times as we want by keeping it inside the same graphical interface. As you see, we have all of our test data right over here on the left-hand section of the debugger. We can actually see each one of them at any point of time. This is all about debugger. Now let's move into global debugger. Global Debugger is something which is new and is only available on version 7 and 8. A regular debugger does not give us the flexibility to test async cells and see what exactly is happening in those cells on decisions without going into the profiler. But with Global Debugger, testing async flows becomes much easier. However, we recommend that you do not use this often, not to use it in production environment, and to turn it off once we are done using it. Now, I'll be moving back into our Designer Studio, and I'm going to go right over here at the bottom left corner and click on the small icon which looks like a wrench symbol over here and navigate into the Show Global Debugger. This is one way how we can get into the Global Debugger. We can also come back to our studio and click on the icon which is available right at the bottom left corner and navigate into the Global Debugger. As you see, currently the Global Debugger is turned off. We can also group this as required. We can group it for all the flows or all the activities that are happening, or we can also select no grouping. We can also preserve the data for the required time frame. Over here, we can also custom the time that we would like to preserve the data for. Let's go ahead and turn our Global Debugger on. Right now, we do not have anything running, so this looks empty. So let's go ahead and run our purchase request flow. As we run this flow, we would be able to exactly see the form that we have customized. And as we enter the details and click on submit, the flow gets executed. Now let us switch back into our Global Debugger. And as you see, we have our purchase request flow right over here. And also other processes that were running in the background are now visible right over here. There is a system default flow, which is actually looking into our inbox and fetching in the assignments if we have any. This is a scheduled job which is running for every minute. As we click in our purchase flow, we would be able to see the exact set of process and the path that the flow has taken, and also we can navigate into each one of the steps. So the real advantage of a global debugger is when we have async flows. We can actually see what is going on inside an async flow without turning into synchronous with the help of a global debugger. Another advantage that we have with a global debugger is if we have multiple processes or we have multiple people running multiple processes on a same instances, we would now be able to get a holistic overview of all such processes running on the system with the help of global debugger. This means a lot of processes that ran in the background traditionally are now exposed through global debugger. Before we exit our global debugger, let's ensure that we turn this off so that our system will not take up existing resources. Now we are going to talk about unit test and sample data. And unit test is data that can be used over and over again per flow, whereas a sample data or data samples can be used across multiple flows throughout the organization. As you see in the slide, we had made a comparison between unit tests and data samples. So data samples can be shared with other flows and rules while unit tests cannot be shared. A unit test can evaluate the result of a flow or a rule while a data sample cannot. Both of this can be used in a debugger as well as a global debugger. Import, export, and deploy of unit test with the flows or rules is completely possible, while with data samples, we cannot. Both unit tests and data samples can be used during the design to highlight changes. Unit tests and data samples are very important features as we are designing in decisions. This is because while we are making changes to our flows or rules, we want to make sure that we have consistent outcomes or results. Using unit tests and data samples, we would be able to accomplish this goal. Speaking more about unit tests, they have a couple of different features. That is, they are probably a sample data that can be run on demand. Unit tests can also be scheduled. For example, we can schedule a unit test to run overnight or when we are having some low impact. We can also automatically kick off our unit test by selecting test on save, so that every time we save our flow, the unit test gets kicked off automatically. Let's go ahead and see how we can set up unit tests on decisions. I'll be switching back into our designer studio to take you through on how we set up these unit tests. Let's get into one of the simple rules I have created for us for testing purpose today. So this is a simple rule which actually looks in if the day of week is Tuesday and returns Boolean value, which is true or false. So I have already set up some unit test for us. So let's go ahead and create a new unit test in addition to the existing. So as we click on the left hand section, we would be able to see the unit test and sample data which are pre-existing in the rule or the flow, or we can go into debug and we can also set up our unit test or sample data and see the existing ones right over here. Let's go back and add a new unit test right from here. And when we click this, we would be able to pass in the constant input data or the information that is available throughout the flow. For now, let's keep this as a constant input data and see if the day of week is Tuesday. This is our input. And when we click on edit, now we would have access to entire flow information or the information that is available throughout the other processes as well. So let's go ahead and evaluate the output of this rule, which is rule run result, and see if it is true. And save this unit test. And now let's name this as Tuesday. This is how simple it is to configure unit tests on Decisions platform. Now we can evaluate these unit tests by simply clicking on over here. And as you can see, the rule got evaluated. Since Monday is not equivalent to Tuesday, the rule returned to us with a false. And if we click on over here, we would be able to see or evaluate the next unit test available. We can also click on debug and evaluate all of the unit tests and see the outputs over here. As you see, all of the unit tests got successfully evaluated because we have configured it in similar fashion. And in case if we want to see what were the outputs or how the rule got evaluated, we can just click over here and see the results as well as how the execution did happen. So let's get into another set of rule, which is truth table. So I have already configured another type of rule for us, which is truth table. Let's get into that. And here is our approver truth table. Truth table, as you all know, is another type of rule designer in decisions, which evaluates multiple conditions in an easy to read Excel-like format. We have our sample unit tests which were predefined right over here. We can click into each one of this and see how this unit test gets evaluated. We can also click on the icon over here and edit these unit tests. As you see, we have passed in the entire policy application as an input for this particular unit test. And right here, the truth table evaluates if the type of instrument is equivalent to the categories mentioned below, and also looks into the replacement cost and returns to us with the policy admin, underwriter, and the manager information. As we click over here, we would be able to see how the truth table got evaluated, or how this particular rule got evaluated. Since it is a piano, this particular rule got evaluated as true and returned to us this information related to the policy admin, underwriter, and manager. We can also get into debug and explore the information right over here. So this is a simple function which quickly allows us to add data, able to test the flow, test the rule over and over again without passing inputs multiple times. So now let's see how we can automate these unit tests. For this, we have to actually go into our settings. Let's not save this. Let's go under setting. Oh, this is version 8. So you can switch into the settings right over here. And under system, we have our settings. Let's go into here and let's navigate into our Designer Studio settings right over here and search for unit test. So as soon as we type our unit test over here, we can see how we can test our unit test, whether we want it as a daily, whether we want to automate these tests after an import, or run this for every save. We can also send or alerts or notifications to prescribed email addresses if there are any broken tests, or if the unit test gets failed. So let's keep this as is and click on save. Let's talk about sample data. Sample data is a simple report which has data in it. So before we speak more about sample data, let me navigate back into our instrument insurance folder and get into the truth table. So as mentioned, sample data is a simple report which has all the data in it. The report can be like you see over here. This sample data over here evaluates the type of instrument, replacement cost, and returns to us with the respective outputs. As you see, the sample data over here had 89 samples, and the execution time for these samples were 74 milliseconds. We also see the outputs of these sample data and what percentage was the allocation, and there were some no matches as well. We can set up the sample data right from here by clicking on Add New, or we can go under Debug and add our own set of sample data that we intend to pass in throughout this flow, or maybe throughout the processes across the organization. So thus, sample data allows us to create data sets across multiple rules, multiple flows, and see it here in the graphical interface along with the outcome. The sample data also facilitate us to pass in large data sets and see the results in the large data sets. So to summarize, unit tests are for units that cannot be used across multiple flows or rules. They are designed as a one-time run against those flows or rules. Whereas data samples are large sample data which can be used for sampling across the complete organization for different flows and different rules. So the next thing that I would like to cover today is about debugging tools. So for this, I'll be switching back into the slides. So let me just go back into the slides and move on to the next topic, that is debugging tools. So there are different types of workflow debugging tools, that is subflows, data type, simulation mode, and error handling. So subflows, nested subflows and rules can be seen in debugger unless it is async. However, global debugger allows async flows to be seen. When you are trying to pass in many inputs, the best practice is utilize data types that are represented as data objects. This makes rules flows more readable and also makes setting up inputs and outputs a lot easier. Another feature that we have in decisions is simulation mode. The best example or use case that we can speak for this is, let's say we are calling out to a third party system, which costs us some amount of money. And when every call out we make. So at that point of time, we would not want our testing to happen in debugging or in unit tests or in productions or even actually while running it. So in that case, working in simulation mode allows us to take sample data from the third party APIs and simulate the behavior coming out for further testing. Simulation mode allows us to skip and mock results for database services and forms. In addition to all of this, we also have log steps that we can add to any flow, which helps us to catch all the exceptions to record and handle errors. Let's switch back into the studio and see how the logs are actually configured in decisions. So let me just go back into the studio, and now under systems folder, we have administration, and here we have our system tools, and here we do have our logging. This is where all the logs are going to be written by default. As you can see, we have category, level, timestamp, which mentions when this log actually did happen and the message. So based upon the category and the level, it becomes easy for us to filter out these logs. So we can customize the log category and can define it and can filter as required. So now we would be moving on to the profiler. I'll be just switching back onto my slides. And as you see, profiler is a unique tool. Profiler allows us to see what flows are under execution, any of the database calls, and any hotspots that might have taken long time to run or execute. As we go into our studio, we would be able to navigate into the profiler by clicking under system, system tools, and the profiler. And it gives us the exact information that we have just seen in our slide, like flow execution, database calls made, number of flow steps that actually run throughout the process, and also any hotspots. We can also navigate into the profiler by clicking at the bottom left corner, the small icon present over here, and by clicking on the show profiler. This would take us to the same profiler page and gives us all the information that we just spoke about. If we are looking for anything in particular, we can always load a new session or start a new profile session. As we customize it, we can see the results for that particular session. We can stop the profiling with or without saving the data. We also have other info like profile views summarized, profile sessions, and the profile time. We can also download the profile data or the text view. And as the data gets downloaded, we can now see that the entire text data is available right over here. And with the info like this, we would be able to identify what is being called out and the average time it is taking in and what actually is taking more time to get executed. A profiler becomes much handy when we are not able to figure out what's going in a process which is taking more time. So it is much easy to identify issues in decisions without contacting IT team, as we have a graphical interface which allows us to see what is going on, what flow has been called, what job or what database call or external system is causing the slowdown. So the next thing we will discuss today is about logs. So the next thing we will talk about today is logs. So I'll be navigating back into my slides. And when we speak about logs, we have three different functions: event viewer, logging, and flow management. Event viewer shows us all the events that happen in the log. Logging is a place where the logs are being logged. So let's navigate back into our studio, and to get into the logging, all we have to do is navigate to system, administration, and under system tools, we have all the events. So by clicking on the event viewer, we would be able to see all the events, and we can also capture the SQL calls, API timings, as well as flow step timings. We can also capture the system activity or navigate into the system activity, and we would be able to see all of the activities that were reported on every 30 seconds. We also have other functionalities like upgrade history, which gives us complete info on the upgrades that happened so far. Decision store all of our info related to upgrades, like when we have done our last update, what time it was, and this gives us the complete history of all the updates. We can also see scheduled job logs under more, and by clicking on scheduled job log, we would be navigated right over the page. And here we go with the scheduled job log activities as well as pending jobs. Same goes with the logging, which gives us info about the category of the log, level of the log, whether it was a fatal log or a warning, and other information like what time the log has been logged in and the message related to that particular log. Moving on to flow management, this shows all the flows right here. It gives us info related to the stored flows, what were the recent flows that got executed, and the CPUs that have been running. We can also see all the details related to stored workflows by clicking under more and selecting stored workflows. So in addition to these, we also have the ability to see the integration activities that did happen throughout this session or throughout the process. So finally, I would like to end this session by giving a quick summary of what we have discussed so far, and also giving you some quick info around the best practices around the unit tests and debugging. So for this, I'll be switching back to my slides. And when we speak about the summary, all we get to discuss is about what is a debugger and a global debugger, what are data samples, unit tests, and profile logs. So debugger or global debugger helps us to identify issues and resolve them while we are building the workflows. Data samples are test data that is usable across different flows and roles. Unit tests are also the test data that is tied to a specific flow or a rule with inherent capabilities. Profilers or logs helps us to locate and identify problems and measures performances. So moving on to the best practices. The first and foremost important thing that all of us should keep in mind is debug early and often. Next, utilize all of the debugging tools like simulation mode, unit tests, data samples. Always refer to documentation site. Documentation.decisions.com gives us all the information to the queries that we have. So this is the documentation site. We can select the version that we are looking for, and currently we are on version 8, and here you can find all the information like global debugger, what is it, how to use it, and if we have any queries related to unit test, we can type that and navigate into that particular page that gives us all additional info. And lastly, if we have any further questions, we can always contact to the support with the set of questions. Thank you for being on this session. Have a great day.